given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Great request came our way. We're going to talk about what mistakes you don't want to make as a frontline supervisor. The request came from an officer who's getting ready to cross into becoming a sergeant. So what I thought we could do is, obviously we'll be discussing some custody-specific concerns when you're a sergeant, but I also thought that we can cover just being that frontline supervisor, because this is the time, guys, that when you cross into supervising what could be your former peers. So now it's not about the inmates, you're supervising the people who supervise the inmates. So it's definitely a higher level responsibility, and that transition is the hardest. It's not, as you start to move up, when you go from first level to second level, the transition is, to me, it starts to become a little bit easier. But the first jump from officer or frontline to that first level supervisor, to me, is the hardest jump. And hopefully we're able to provide some value here and get you to, avoid some mistakes that can have an impact on you or how people view you within that first year. Because that first year, it's tough. If you make a mistake in that first year, you got to be concerned of, well, that mistake, how much weight will that carry? How will my peers see me, or how will I see myself? So hopefully we can provide some content here that can help with dealing with those mistakes so you can avoid it and keep the confidence where it needs to be. I have two guests that's going to share in on this dialogue. Connie, author Connie. What's up, Connie?
Hello, everybody. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host of The Fly Behind the Wall, and now the author of The Cage Was Her Cocoon. So tonight, I'm looking forward to having this discussion, because I really think, people do need the insight in order to really be open to what that first year is going to bring.
And guys, if you get a chance, please check out Connie's stuff. I know she has websites, and she's got the podcast, but the book, and I know Andy read it, is very inspirational. Andy, it's been a while. I hope 2021 is good for you. I hear a lot of good things coming our way from you. Very excited to have you back on the show. Andy, if you don't mind, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. Hey, thanks for having me back on, guys. It's Andrew Abney-Brotz coming to you from Indiana. 21 is a good year thus far, and it's going to continue to be great, especially my way. But, Anthony talked about Connie's book. I've read it. It's amazing. It's inspiring. You should read it. And I'm waiting on yours, Anthony. I'm ready to crack that dude open. So thanks again for having me on. Let's do this.
All right, guys. So if you did pre-order the book, Inmate Manipulation Decoded, and it's coming through me for the signatures, I get the books around January 23rd. I'll sign them and ship them right out. But the book is available now on Amazon. The link is in the description. I believe the book is doing what it's meant to do. It's giving out good advice. And so far, I'm very happy with what people think of the work that I put into it. And I think me and Connie are going to start working on a book that's a little bit more personal. It's about correctional leadership, and some of the dialogues that we're going to have in the near future, probably including this one, you may find again in the book, which I'm definitely looking forward to sharing some of these stories, but also obviously get a chance to kind of know Connie as well, and just learning what she is also going to provide in the book. This is going to be a great journey for us both. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talk, show you brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. When we come back, we're going to talk about what mistakes you don't want to make your first year when you're that frontline supervisor. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, so real quick, guys. First off, the topic did come from someone who is getting ready to either cross into becoming a sergeant, or they could be a sergeant. And I think they understand that when you make a mistake at the very beginning, whether it's your career or your very beginning of crossing into that new role, that mistake could carry a lot of weight as to how people may see you or how you see yourself, especially when it comes to that, having that confidence to continue to move forward. So I think it's good that we're doing a video like this, because hopefully we can, give people enough advice to avoid these mistakes that could have that type of impact. But I want people to realize something. Mistakes are going to happen. I mean, Connie, you got, from the admin level, Connie, and you're looking down, and when you have a new supervisor coming in, I don't care if they had a perfect career as an officer, when you cross into that supervisory role, now you're responsible for other people. To sit there and think that that person's not going to make a mistake, it's the wrong mindset. Correct, Connie?
For sure. Because we all make mistakes, right? We're all learning every day, and that's just a reality. We're always presented with different situations with so many moving variables. In the 18 years there, I've never had the experience of the same event with the same circumstances. So I just think, allowing yourself to not be perfect is probably the best thing I could say, but also just to not take things personal. In this first year of you stepping into this new role, you're going to make some mistakes. People will give you feedback. And the fact that you're moving up, you're growing, you're developing, you're going to have more visibility. And with that, that means more people are going to weigh in when there are things that may happen. And so instead of being defensive, I would just say, hear people out. You take the good, you take the bad. What's constructive, you do your best to apply it, and throw away the bad with the waste. It is what it is.
And I love when you said growing, because I mentioned this before, but mistakes do run parallel to growth. I actually think more than successes do. But with that said, one thing I want to make clear first, and maybe Andy can help me out with this thought, is that when you're crossing into being that supervisor, you're going to transition into a new role. And it's not about transformation. It's about cultivating yourself into this new role of being this supervisor. And for jails, I find it kind of harder to do than in prisons. And the reason being is jails, when you make a promotion, most likely you're going to be forced to supervise those that were your direct peers. Because again, jails, you're kind of working in that one building. Prisons, there could be multiple prisons across the states, or across the state. So what happens here is, if you're lucky, when you make rank, you're going to want to be transferred to another prison, hopefully if it's within driving distance. And the reason being is because you kind of want to supervise people that don't know you as an officer or as a frontline worker. This will give you a chance to pick up the role that you're meant to be, because now you're the supervisor, and you can kind of focus on yourself and developing that. Now, granted, you may have people that may come in later that know you as an officer, but the adjustment is on them now, because right now the environment sees you as a supervisor. When you're at a jail, or even if you're working within the same prison, so I get promoted and I wind up staying in the same prison, it's harder because the environment may not see me as that supervisor, because I was just their peer only a day ago, only a few hours ago. So now the adjustment is extremely hard, because I may not have the support of my environment, because as I try to move forward, they may make efforts to bring me back. So the onus is more on me without the support of the environment. Now, that's not always 100%. Sometimes you do have people that are supportive of that growth. But for the most part, when you want to make that supervisory position, I do feel that it is best, but it's just my opinion, that you're able to go to another facility and kind of step into the role, and then the environment already will kind of help you, as opposed to what they already know you as. But obviously in jails, you may not be able to get that, right? Right, Andy?
Yeah, and it really depends on the level of jail you work in. The larger the county jail, the easier it's going to be to transition from that entry-level corrections officer to an entry-level supervisor. But if you come from a medium-sized jail, such as the one I came from, it's very difficult, because you're right. You're going to work with the same peers that you ran with, that you went out with, and that you associated with. And now it's time for you to be their boss. And sometimes that's hard for people to transition into that role. And it's something I faced when I first got into supervision. I was enforcing rules that then my subordinates and said, well, hey, you were doing this last year, so what's the difference? And that's something that you're going to have to overcome, especially as you move up the ranks in leadership. It's just something you're going to have to deal with, and not get involved with grabbing a hold of those peers and bringing them with you into supervision. That's another problem too that we can talk about. But I can go on all day about this. Being an admin, it's definitely interesting to see that now when you're over the entire facility. You see it as a whole, and you see those supervisors coming up, and so you can kind of take them around the arm and say, these are the problems I face. These are the problems you're going to face. And these are problems you're going to have to overcome if you want to remain in the rank that you're in.
Yeah, so definitely one thing is transitioning into the role and trying to go to an area where the environment will support it, so you yourself can be solidified. And then I'll be honest with you, once you find out, who you want to be as a supervisor, then they can put you almost anywhere. Then even supervising your own peers shouldn't be a problem because, again, you already know who you need to be. But when you're developing it, it's kind of harder because the influence from the environment can either motivate or it can kind of pull you away from it. And that's why I think it's very good when you're kind of, learning the ropes of what you want to do, is if you're in an environment that only sees you as that, because that will help you develop a little bit quicker. And as we're touching on this, I just want to say something right now, because Andy kind of started touching on it, was I'm not, when we say this, there is a connection that you're going to have to your people, but that connection is going to be a little bit different now. I'm not saying you don't care about your people when you move up. That's not what I'm saying. Of course you care. You probably even care more so for many reasons. One is you're responsible for them now. That's one thing. But second thing is you're responsible for them now. So there's multiple reasons why, you're always going to have that level of care, especially if you're crossing into that leadership role. You don't want to be a supervisor. You want to be a leader. But there also is a level of removal now from them. That's something that's very hard for a lot of people to transition from. Like we used to be buddies, and now I feel it's a little different. Well, it's going to be a little different. I mean, that conversations that were so freely happening when you were an officer, you may walk into a room now and the room goes quiet now. That's actually a good thing, believe it or not. I know it may sound crazy, but sometimes that's a good thing, because that means that the environment's giving you that respect. Because maybe that conversation that you had as an officer, sad to say, but as a supervisor, maybe a little bit different for your ears. But Connie, that transition, that I'm no longer one of them, how hard is that for that adjustment?
So I think it could be difficult, but I think it could be eased if, in fact, we have those professional conversations with our colleagues, right? So when I transitioned into management, I was in a jail. I was on Rikers Island, and I was supervising the people who I was friends with. And so when I got the promotion, I actually had them all come into my office. It was just 6 of us. And I was like, so, hey, guys, I got promoted, right? Like it wasn't like a secret. I wasn't trying to hide it. And like, I really just wanted them to know I'm still going to advocate. I'm still going to do what I need to do. But I also said, I'm going to have to hold you accountable, right? Which was a different conversation, right? And so they were like, Connie. And so I think you deal with the dismissive stuff because it is uncomfortable until it becomes a thing, right? So when time and attendance became a thing, and I'm dealing with payroll stuff, and I'm dealing with tardiness, and I'm dealing with reviewing clinical notes and they're not appropriate. Like, those are tough conversations. But I feel like when people know that your intentions aren't like I'm trying to stick it to them, or that your ego has gotten so huge that, they can't respect your role because they think you're overdoing it because of your ego. I think part of that is, let's talk about it head on, as opposed to kind of pretending like the transition didn't happen. And so I just won't address her like a supervisor. I won't engage with her on a supervisor direct report level. And I think the other part to that is when you see it happening, that you got to address it, right? So when you are transitioning into that front line, that management from front line, that first level, like you may have to say something to the people who were your friends, right? Who, yeah, you're right. Like to Andy's point, yeah, we were just doing this last week, right? And I think as we talk about, I think we've talked a couple of times about how important it is when you first start your career, right? Like to conduct yourself in a particular manner, because then you don't have to worry about those kind of statements like, oh, you was doing that before. Like, how come we can't do that now, right? It's like, not to say you're planning to move up, but like if you could start from scratch and kind of undo some of the crappy decisions you might have made, like maybe that's a way to kind of bear in mind, if you're new to the career, let me start off on the right foot and let me try to make sure I do everything on the up and up, because should I get promoted, like that's the last thing you want to hear from your colleagues, that you were cutting corners the whole while and now all of a sudden you want to write me up for something that we all been doing.
You know, your reputation, you're 100% correct. Your reputation as a frontline professional, as an officer, will travel with you. And the funny thing is, that it travels with you even if you go to a different facility, because people always know somebody. But if you had that good reputation, even as that peer, you know, maybe sometimes even as a peer, you could be a leader. You know, you just happen to be someone that they trust. Then when you get put into that higher level, you know, people kind of understand what you're about. And that puts a different context to your job too. Like, you know, the discipline isn't a CYA for me. It's an educational thing for you. You know what I mean? I'm looking to help you grow. And at the end of the day, sometimes it's hard for, again, it makes this more at the jail. Sometimes it's hard for, I've seen this happen where senior staff who's trained me now has to get corrective action from me. You know, where now I'm telling them what they're doing wrong, and the person's not, they're like, you done? Yeah. Let me tell you something. When you were a rookie, it's like, yeah, but this is regardless of me being a rookie now. But the problem is again, this is really going to go to the front line right now, is we want to make sure that we cultivate good leaders, which means if we have someone that we feel could be a good leader, you know, obviously we need to do what we can to support that person and let them be who they need to be, because in the end, we could wind up transforming a good leader into a bad leader by not accepting them as a leader. So now you just transformed a good leader into a bad supervisor. Let's do that. And Andy, you think that happens if the front line, for some reason, just does not want to see this person in that supervisory position?
Yeah, I think so. You know, Connie touched on it, especially when you're starting off as a newer corrections officer or correctional professional, regardless of what department you're in your jail or prison. You know, start being professional off the top, because, you know, sometimes I wish I could kind of erase some of the things I did starting off as a rookie, you know, like jumping out of closets, scaring people as they're walking down the hallway. And now as a supervisor, I'm looking at that saying, okay, that's not as professional as we should be at this point in time. You know, and sometimes you're labeled as, you know, oh, you're one of them now. You're one of those people now. You know, and that's just to say, look, I, you know, view things a little differently now. You know, you have to be part of the cause. You have to be a part of your strategic plan if you have one, or the sheriff's vision, or the administrator's vision, or whatever the case may be. So as you continue to move up into rank, the people below you need to understand that you're there to be their supervisor, and you're trying to move up and make a difference. So it's definitely good points by both.
And the funny thing is, guys, so when we're talking about the first year, the concern is going to be and I think why we're specific to the first year is the precedence that we're going to set. So I want to go back to being an officer the first day on the job. You're going to set a precedence to the inmates, right? As to how much you're going to tolerate. And the reason why you do that is, again, we talk about the no's, that easier to become a yes as opposed to a yes becoming a no. When you start to move up and you become that supervisor, you have to kind of set the same precedence. You know, what are you going to tolerate? What are you not going to tolerate, especially in that first year? And the hardest thing that you're going to have to do, but it definitely deals with setting that precedence, is when you have to commit to a discipline of a friend, or who was once a friend. It's the hardest thing you have to do, but sometimes it has to be done. And if you don't do it, because I want to tell you something, guys, if you're and it's the worst feeling in the world. It's the worst feeling in the world. I've had numerous people come to my office who have just taken the supervisory position and that have been put in a position where they had to write a former peer. And what you have to do is easy, but it's not easy. You got to write them, but it's not easy to do. And the sad thing is for the one individual, again, very good friend of mine, it was a conflict for them. But the conflict was a personal conflict and not a professional conflict. So as they were able to vent, they realized they knew what the right thing was to do. All they wanted was, this is a person that's very confident in their ways. It wasn't confirmation they were looking for. They were looking for reassurance. Just this first time around, I understand that, because writing up a peer is hard. It's not easy, you know, and you just want someone to say, am I doing the right thing? And yes, because it's not you that's causing the person to, you know, be written up. It's that person. And sometimes there could be a guilt trip involved where that person goes, well, I can't believe you're going to write me up. We used to be people. And the response should be, well, you shouldn't have put me in a position to write you up. It's a card that already is being played on someone who's already dealing with that conflict. And you know it. And then you continue to push and push in hopes that emotion will blind that person from doing what is right. So having said that, guys, it's a very hard step. I don't want to wish it on anyone, but then I also do want to wish it, because that's the moment where you step into that role. The hardest thing to do is do that. But once you're able to manage that, then I think in my mind, again, it's hard to do, but then I think in my mind, you're starting to take that objective role, because once that peer puts you in that position, everybody's watching you. Everybody, you know, including obviously the person that you're about ready to get right up, a former friend, let's say, but also their peers, because they want to see, if you let this person go, well, then you're going to have to let me go. Oh, and then you're going to have to let them go. So Connie, have you ever been put in a position where you had to write a former friend, and did they make it easier for you, or did they make it harder for you?
No, it wasn't easy. I wish that was my story, right? But you know, there was a situation where I had to write up a friend, and you know, even after the write up, like we had a conversation. I was like, listen, I don't want to have to write you up, but I'm also just like, I'm held accountable here. And, you know, it doesn't change that what you did was wrong, right? Because I also don't want to say, oh, but central office wants me to do that, right? I have to own that this is a decision to write up because the action you took was wrong, as opposed to shifting blame somewhere else to help ease or make the friendship comfortable. Like, because at this point, this is a work relationship. Outside of work, that's a different situation. And so when we are in facility and you push me into the position where I have to be your boss and like do things that bosses do, like yes, it feels uncomfortable. And, you know, there's going to be times where like that person may want to debate with you. Well, it shouldn't be this, and I didn't do that, and who else did whatever. Like you have to be able to redirect that energy and refocus that person on, so here's what you did, and here's why we are in this, you know, situation right now, and be able to own that. And I think it takes time in order for you to feel comfortable doing that without having those harsh feelings or those guilty feelings, because you do struggle with, this was my friend. Like, I know this is going to be on their record, or I know this is a blemish, or maybe this could impact a promotion down the line. Like, those are things that I think any manager who like they care about their people, they struggle with.
And you know what's funny, Connie? You said friend. I've been saying former friend because we've had different outcomes because of that. My outcome is the person is now a former friend. Your outcome, I'm assuming, is the person's still a friend. Yeah. See, my outcome's a little different, but that's the reason why I was saying former friend, because I was personalizing it. But technically, I'm I'm glad that we kind of covered both, because my outcome wasn't, we don't talk anymore. Just not an understanding of the perspective I was in, and also making me have to take that perspective. And just at that point, it just ended, and there was just no resolution at that point. Hey, Andy, what's your thoughts? Have you been put in a situation where you had to write up a peer, or maybe even a former mentor?
Oh, yeah. It's a good point. The first couple of times I had disciplined staff, you know, it is definitely difficult. Like Connie said, you know, you're viewed as one of them now, but Connie is 100% when you throw it right back and say, well, you shouldn't have put me in that situation to begin with. So that was spot on. You know, just my experience with entry-level supervision, you know, and I hate to say this because we become paper pushers, but the more you write somebody up on disciplinary action, the easier it gets. It's never easy, but it gets easier. So I do want to put that out there as well. But yeah, you know, things that you used to do as opposed to things that you were enforcing as a leader, you know, definitely is a turn the page situation. And working with people that you were trained by, that now you supervise, is definitely difficult. But like I said, you know, the more you do it, the easier it is. And it depends on the type of violation you're writing them on too. You know, progressive discipline, they should know, you know, hey, I got this reprimand, but I was told 5 times before not to do that. Or if it's a safety and security issue, we're going to jump right to a reprimand. So, you know, again, don't put me in that particular situation. Do your job, be the pros that we know you can be, and let's do this all together. But it's definitely tough. It really is.
Right. And by the way, when we're talking about discipline, you know, we're exhausted all measures to kind of educate. And, you know, again, sometimes it's hard for people to be receptive of the new sergeant's advice, especially if they can't see that person, or the new frontline supervisor's advice, especially if they can't see that person as a supervisor. If I could only see that person as, well, you were just an officer yesterday. Okay, but now I'm your supervisor. So are you going to be receptive to what I have to offer? Oh, what do you got, Andy?
You know, something that just popped in my head was, as you move up, you know, your subordinate staff should view you as an enforcer anyway, because like you said in the earlier show, a new corrections officer needs to write the inmates up. Every violation that they come across, write them up. So, you know, when it comes time for you to write your subordinate staff up, it shouldn't be a surprise that you're going to do that, because you enforce the rules with the inmates, you're going to enforce the rules with the staff. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, and that's powerful. And again, I just want people to know that we're all firm believers in exhausting every measure before a write-up. But the negligence, the criminal acts, obviously, that's a whole different ball game. And the person that just doesn't want to listen. Because at the end of the day, if you don't enforce the rules for the people that aren't listening, then what's that say to the people that are listening, that are doing the right job? How are we motivating them? You know, because in the end, they're the ones that are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And at the same time, when you have the people that aren't, you don't want to put them in the same boat, because they wind up taking the burden of the work. You know, if I don't reinforce, you know, what needs to be done to the people that aren't doing it, then look what I'm doing to the good staff who are. I'm disenfranchising them eventually, because I'm letting, you know, the people that should be doing the job not, and I'm putting a lot of the burden on the people that are. So in fairness, if I want to keep things fair, yes, as a supervisor, you know, I want to make sure that everybody's doing the work and they're held accountable for it, because I don't want good employees to become disenfranchised because they're holding the weight of the whole shift. You know, and that's just another level of fairness, I believe, that's very hard to argue against. You know, I also want to say something as a frontline supervisor. I look to de-escalate everything. This is more maybe a sergeant's perspective, but I'm sure Connie may be able to have something from a civilian side. But let me be specific with a story here with from a sergeant's role. Is I never realized the importance of that go-to officer who knows how to communicate until I became a supervisor, and I started relying on them, because I didn't want, you know, as a supervisor, responsible for the officers, the inmates. I mean, there's a lot of things you're responsible for. So anytime there's a chance to de-escalate, I was good with that. You know, and if I had to, you know, put some effort into de-escalation, as long as my staff wasn't at risk, as long as the agency wasn't at risk, I'm going to devote some time, see what my resources are, pull on mental health, do what I got to do to try to exhaust all efforts to de-escalate. And I think as a supervisor, not so much as a peer. You know what's funny, guys? When I was a regular officer, I actually was used a lot of times to de-escalate. And I don't know as a peer, as an officer, if I was appreciated as much as I was by my supervisors who kept calling me. Now, when I was a supervisor, I made sure that I let my staff know how important that person is. That person I'm calling right now that just seems to have that knack with talking to inmates. And the funny thing is that knack comes with how that person, delivers, but also their reputation. Believe it or not, that's something that you cannot teach. There are certain officers that come on the scene that just have that reputation that the inmates respect. And if you're able to utilize that person, but let the team know the value. Because at the end, you may have some rookies that want to go in guns a-blazing. That's not what we want to do. That's supposed to be a last resort. And when you get these rookies that want to go in guns a-blazing, they actually kind of get mad at the person who's settling it. Come on, Gan, stop. We want to go in there. Why? That's not our job. That means at one point, maybe, we fail to do what needs to be done, which is to de-escalate. I don't want nobody getting hurt. I don't want my officers to get hurt. I don't even want the inmate to get hurt. So at the end of the day is if I can have that person that can de-escalate, I want to give that a shot. And if that fails, then let's do what we got to do. I have no problem doing that. But I think if you're a new boot and you're becoming that sergeant, look for those people that have that skill to de-escalate. Now, before we go to Connie, I see, Andy, you're in agreement with that from a custodial perspective. Would you agree? Do you think that that's someone that you definitely learn to appreciate as you move up?
Yeah, and that's something that other staff members need to understand, like you said, that you're not making them a favorite, but they are good at that particular job or that particular area of the job. And when it comes to de-escalation, kind of takes me back to somebody I used to work with. His nickname was Reverend. He wasn't affiliated with religion at all, but he had that demeanor like a minister, speaking a sermon has, just that calming effect with people, even irate inmates. So you would send him in there and he would de-escalate situations. And then you're right, though. You've got the gung-ho, guns a-blazing rookies. I was one of them. Sometimes, still am. But, you learn to respect those people, and your staff members realize that they're there. They're going in first to make their jobs easier, to make everyone go home, not to get people hurt, and to take care of the situation. So it's definitely a good point.
What's funny real quick is Connie smiled when Andy said he was one of the gung-ho people. I can just imagine being a supervisor, right? And we're getting ready to say, well, where's Andy? He damn ran under the door. Yeah, he ran under the door. He's already in there. Hey, Connie, what's your thought? I'm sure obviously you get those irate inmates as well. Do you look for that person that can communicate, that person that can de-escalate?
Generally, you want that person who has a good rapport with the population, right? You want that person they have a way of talking to the population and de-escalating. You have, because there's some people who they come with a very high energy and they can only intensify a situation. And I could relate to that Reverend sort of comment Andy made, because there are times there are those people who come in. There was this lady who was a teacher. She wasn't a reverend, but she had this way of talking to the population almost as if they were her kids. It was, I don't know. It wasn't it wasn't soft and coddling. It was just, come on now. So here's what we got right now. She had this way of just reasoning, and they would be like, oh, where is so-and-so? I won't say her name. And I think those are the people who've learned how to, whether it's their body language or it's just the tone of voice or it's just their rapport, right? People have seen them handle people who are irate, or there's a certain level of respect that the population may have for a particular person. So it makes it easier when that person is on the scene, because it's all right, if that person wasn't there, he might have wilded out, right? But in this instance, they didn't, because, they got respect for those particular officers or for those staff who happen to be covering a unit at a particular time.
And you know what's funny? When you go through the daily briefings, obviously we definitely take notes of use of force, but I don't know if it ever travels up to the higher level of the people that actually de-escalate, that stop the use of force from happening. I think that those good efforts kind of get lost. So I think as a supervisor, if you have a chance to recognize that, because there may not be a, if you de-escalate something, then may not be a follow-up report. We don't know. But if you feel that there's someone that was responsible for doing something that slowed down what could have later escalated, that may not make it in the reports for the day because it didn't turn out to an unusual incident. But it doesn't matter if maybe you write a little note to your higher up saying, hey, be advised, this matter could have been a lot worse if it wasn't for the Reverend coming in and kind of, de-escalating the situation. So again, I guess here the mistake is make sure you recognize the employee's efforts. Go ahead, Connie. You're muted. Okay.
I just wanted to add that because someone else has that particular skill, it doesn't take away from someone else's abilities. And I think sometimes that's why people don't recognize when you have that person who just has that skill set. They don't necessarily want to highlight that because somehow that person may look like they're better, more effective, more efficient, whatever that is. So I just wanted to add that point that recognizing someone's skill set doesn't diminish what you bring to the table.
Connie, actually, let's cross into something like that now. You just got me thinking of something. So obviously, when you go for rank, it's obviously competitive. Unfortunately, it just is what it is. But the competition should stop the moment the person gets awarded the position. Or because I got picked for a position you didn't, doesn't mean that I'm better than you in any way, sense, or form. I want people to know that. Maybe it's just my time. Or maybe I had a okay interview. But the point is, it doesn't mean in any way, sense, or form that I'm better than you. There should be no competition to the point where when that supervisor takes that position, there's still jealousy. There's always good to have friendly competition, as long as it's meant to make us better. But if we become too competitive, we wind up hiding stuff from each other because we're afraid if I give you that bit of intel, you're going to be better than me. And I just want to share an example here too, as a supervisor. When I was an officer, I used to love getting into the gangs. I used to learn a lot about gangs, guys. That was my thing. I was the gang guy, where I was at. When I became the supervisor, I had to kind of let that go to my people. That's their job. Now, don't get me wrong, I can still learn, but I got to become a supervisor now. And I didn't have time to figure out both. So what I'm trying to get at is that now, if I had that officer that I thought was on point with gangs, but here I am, I'm recognized as the gang guy, and they give me this #1 title. Sometimes people want to hold on to that, and they want to hide information that can make this person #1. But maybe it's my time is done. Maybe it is as a supervisor now to give that title over to someone else, because the last thing I'm doing right now, and I don't want to do that, is by me holding on that title, holding on to that information. One thing, I'm stopping this person from growing, but second thing is this is information that may have to get out there, and the reason why I'm not giving it out is because I'm insecure in myself, so sometimes when we recognize somebody for being the best, and then when they start to move up, they may still want to hold on to that title. They may not want to, train somebody who has a chance to be better than them. And that's not what leaders do. Leaders want people to be better than them. So you had your moment. Now it's this person's time to shine. So it's not about, you wanting to hold on to that title. It's about who are you going to give it to now? Who has the potential? Because in the end, when you cultivate somebody, guys, when you invest in somebody and you see them succeed, it's just an amazing feeling, because it's not about you. It's about what you're able to do for someone else. And I feel sometimes when we become supervisors, we may not let go of what our former position was because we still want to be the best. And at that time, it's time for you to let that go. Again, in regards to that specific position. But Andy, you understand what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you said your thing was the gangs. My thing was training. As a jail deputy, I was a training officer, FTO, became a training coordinator for the entire jail division. So that was my deal. I wanted to train people, make sure people were trained correctly. And I was viewed as the officer that knew the job well enough to be in that position. So as I went into first line supervision, it was always interesting to see other FTOs training new recruits coming in. And sometimes I saw the FTOs doing something that I didn't really agree with, and I wanted to jump in and say, hey, that's not the way to do it. But, you don't want to let that new recruit know that, well, hey, my FTO doesn't know what the hell he's doing because my sergeant or my corporal just, corrected him. So you take that FTO aside later on and say, hey, I didn't really like the way you did this. You might go this route because this is the way, kind of I used to roll with it, but whatever. So yeah, definitely got to be careful with that. So you're not making the person that replaced you in that position look like they don't know what they're talking about.
Right. And Connie, I think it leads into that micromanaging too, because I haven't been able to let it go. I don't want to delegate.
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent, I think what it is too is that people like the glory, right? They like the recognition that comes along with being the best. But something my mom always used to say, which I'm like, now I don't know why it comes up now, but she would say, it's great that you are doing so good. It is great. I'm so glad that that door is open for you, but don't close it behind you, right? Like if you're thinking about the broader organization, you can't be the only expert in an area, right? If you don't want your organization to fall flat in that one area that you're an expert, you've got to be willing to train people up so that when you're ready to move on to the next level or to your next role, that there's someone here that can still be as excellent, who can still be great, and the organization isn't going to fumble because you've now stepped away from the role. So like for me, I feel like, yes, there's some challenge in it. I think there's probably that micromanaging piece when you can't let go and you want to make sure they're doing it the way you did it. But the reality is that this is a new set of eyes, and they're going to see things a little different than you've seen it based on their experiences and based on what's happening currently. And you've got to be able to just kind of step aside and allow those people to know, like, there's no harsh feelings, and be a resource to that person. So if you come up to something that, you're not familiar with, feel free to reach out to me. Other than that, like, you've got to kind of just take that step back.
Yeah, I think when it comes to being a leader or that first level supervisor, I mean, you have to give the credit up, when good things happen, and you have to take responsibility for the bad. Now when people see me, they're like, hey, Gant, you used to be the gang guy, right? And it kind of, it hurts because I was so invested in it, but it doesn't hurt so much because I know I left a legacy behind. I like to think I did. And then now I moved on, and hopefully my perspective, I'm on a different trajectory now. My care now is for my people and kind of wanting to leave that impression. But for me, the gangs was, it was a big investment in me because I thought that that's where I can seize opportunities. But now when I became the supervisor, I want to give those opportunities to other people. I want them to be challenged, and I want them to have a rewarding career as well. I want them to stay motivated. And if they find an interest in that, and that keeps them aboard for another 5 or 6 years, then I want to continue with that interest. And, I could always tell them where to look, but at the end of the day, this is their time. This is their time to shine. Also, I think when we're front line, we don't tend to look to the left or right a lot to see what are the other resources outside of our department. And as a supervisor, a lot of us, a frontline supervisor, a lot of us still may stay myopic to our department and not realizing that there's other things that's happening outside of our departments, including, the resources that these other departments can have. So definitely something here I want to mention, maybe Connie could start off first with this, is that, don't be so myopic and think that your department is the only department. If you get a chance, especially as a frontline supervisor, that should be your initial. Technically, when you come in as an officer, I would like to think that you're always looking to the left or right, but obviously you're still learning the job. But I would still like to think that once in a while, when you get a chance to interact with the other departments, you take advantage of it. But as a supervisor, those interactions are going to be forced. you're going to have those interactions. You're not going to be able to forward that off to a supervisor because now you are the supervisor. So get to know those resources, get to know the other players in this game, and ultimately, as a supervisor, you're the one that connects us to the resources. So don't be so myopic thinking that it's only about this department when there's a whole mess of resources out there that can really help us do our job a lot better if we open our eyes to what's to the left and right of us. But Connie, I'm sure you could see, like, you have those supervisors that just kind of very myopic with their department, and they don't really take advantage of, what's around them.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have some supervisors who, they come in and they want to do everything. And then you have some that come in and they want to pace themselves and they want to make sure that they're learning their actual job, whatever they're going to be held accountable for, before they start venturing out. But I think the key is to know that in order for you to truly have a global understanding of what's happening in your facility, you do have to familiarize yourself with the others that are around you. You have to familiarize yourself with the departments and understand how your actions or your decisions could be impacting other departments, whether you're doing it intentionally or not. Just there's that awareness because, oh, I know what's going on in social services, or I know what's going on in the school today. I'm not going to do this thing because I know it's going to impact, whatever other operational activities we have going on. So certainly I feel like, yes, there are those supervisors who may be a little myopic, and that could be because they're just focused on learning. It could also be because they may not have the confidence just yet to start venturing out. And so I think as they build the confidence, we may see those supervisors who are stepping out and going into the other departments and sort of initiating the engagement that may not have already existed.
And obviously, as an admin, I know you definitely see the interactions with the different departments and how it helps, get the mission done. So when you have a supervisor, a very frontline supervisor, kind of just sticking to their own department and not really, looking to the left or right, that really could mess with what the agency needs to get done, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, certainly when you have people doing that, there are things that they're going to miss because, you got to pick your head up, right? Because just even the visual of like, just this is the only thing I do, you're missing stuff that's going on. So like when you just think situational awareness, that's not just what's happening facility wise. When you're in that management role, that's happening. It's what's happening all around you. And so we can't afford to be myopic in our approach.
Yeah, Connie hit it right on the head, with the blinders on. As boots on the ground, first line officer, you're sniffing out that contraband. You want to know where the fight is. You want to know what's going on inside your little realm of inmate awareness. That you do have blinders on and you're not necessarily seeing what is to the left or right, or that was kind of my experience, but it is important to do that. And where I first came into contact with understanding the different departments, dietary, medical, civilian side, was that first supervisor meeting that I attended as a new supervisor. The golden grail behind the door meetings, what are they all about? And I realized, oh crap, that's why the kitchen does what they do. That's why medical does what they do. So that was the turning point where I realized, we are one house, not just custody, not just dietary, not just medical, etc. And I took those opportunities to ask questions. As a new supervisor, I wanted to know why the kitchen did what they did. And, and that's just where I learned as a supervisor and grew, into just the understanding of the entire facility.
Yeah, and it's great when you do that because then you get to see the bigger picture, guys, and it's a lot bigger than what most people think. Also, another thing is we talked about micromanaging, obviously, before. Micromanaging kind of makes your frontline very hesitant. So again, that's why it's very important that you're able to step away from the job that you used to do, because now you are responsible for the inmates, yes, to some extent, but you're responsible really more for the people that deal with the inmates, especially as a frontline supervisor. That's your first time where you really have to start letting things go and letting the officers, do what needs to be done. And you want a confident staff. Micromanaging them or questioning their decisions or letting the inmates circumvent authority, you start taking away confidence from your staff to the point where they become reliant on you, or they become disenfranchised. But either way, when you have staff that's not confident, the job doesn't get done. It doesn't get done. Plus, it's going to make you spread really thin, because they're going to get used to this culture where they're going to ask you for everything, because you're going to have some people that, maybe they're happy with that because they don't want responsibility. But what if you really teach them? I mean, this is about empowering, right? So, I mean, sometimes you go to empower that employee and they give it right back. They're giving back responsibility. You have to give it right back to them and say, yo, I gave you responsibility. And then you get some people who want that responsibility. And then when you micromanage them, you're slowly taking them away from being who they need to be, the potential to be a great supervisor themselves. So one thing you want to do is make sure that you instill confidence. Make sure that you empower those employees. You don't, let the inmates circumvent that authority. You don't micromanage them, and you let them, if need be, as long as it's not a security risk and it's an effort to learn, let them make a decision. And if they make a mistake, it's fine. Be constructive, teach them. But at the end of the day, avoid micromanaging and avoid letting the inmates circumvent their authority to the point where staff just winds up saying, you know what, why even do our job when they're just going to go do Sergeant Gangi, who's just going to give them what they want anyway. Connie, I see you in agreement with that. What's your thoughts?
So I was really just thinking about the whole micromanagement and how it's not empowering. Like, because we say we want to empower people to make those judgment calls on the fly, but it's very hard to build that confidence in their judgment when in fact they're always being second guessed or when they're being undermined. And so you will have those people who are like, it makes no sense for me to decide. Right? And indecision can be very harmful in our environment. If you're sitting and you're waiting, oh, I didn't do it because I was waiting for, my captain to come and tell me what to do. But this is your unit. You're empowered to do this thing, whatever that thing is. And, but if you've now trained the staff to depend on you for every decision, that in of itself says a lot about you and not so much about the staff's ability. I think that we have a way of minimizing the staff's potential by doing that. When you are overbearing, when your presence is just too great and staff aren't given the opportunity to show what they're capable of or to show what they have learned or to innovate, right? How do we do things differently, do them better, do them more efficiently when you have someone who's this constant presence, or every single decision has to be run through that person? And I mean, honestly, that makes for a very stressful work environment. And they don't need the added stress of the micromanager.
I think one of the big things of a supervisor is you want to transform people into being supervisors. So empowering is good for that, what they call transformational leadership. And micromanaging is just the opposite of that, because it gives people the chance to become reliant on the supervisor. But also the key here is kind of pushing off the responsibility. And when they push off responsibility, what else are they pushing off? Accountability. You know what I mean? I'm going to go ahead and push that off to Gangi because, that's the culture Gangi wants. And also, and I think Andy would agree with this, is that especially when it comes to the inmate population, if you start allowing at the very beginning for the inmates to circumvent your staff by always going to you, that precedence is going to make your job a lot harder, because the moment your officers go to, push their level of authority, it's going to be questioned by the inmate immediately. And then officer can't do anything because they know that you're going to come up and, support the inmate. I mean, would you agree that's a horrible precedence to set at the very beginning?
Yes, I would definitely agree. And I kind of wanted to go back, touch on something real quick that Connie had just said about empowering your staff. You want staff members to learn new things every day. And when you, something I'm not great at doing is delegation. And when I hold on to everything that I do and don't delegate down to some staff for them to learn the job, I am actually hurting the staff members, in my opinion, because I'm not allowing them to grow into the officer that I want them to be. So definitely teaching them your ways or the things that you do is definitely important. But when you go to setting precedent among the inmates, you definitely, you got to be empathetic, put yourself back in the shoes of your staff members. And how would that make me as a supervisor feel if I had an inmate that tried to do that. And I had a supervisor that allowed that to happen. It would really kind of tick me off. So you try really hard not to do that. And when you talk about micromanagement, you have those supervisors that are just so wired tight that want to be involved with everything. So it appears they're micromanaging. I had two people pretty pivotal in my career that taught me a couple things. First thing is, it's not called micromanagement. It's called trusting and verifying. And when you put that into the mindset of your staff members, you realize, he's not coming to me every 5 seconds to make sure I got this job done. He's following up with me on the end of the shift just to make sure I got that task done or something doesn't fall through the cracks. And the other thing I learned from another mentor of mine in the career was follow up, follow up, follow up. And if you don't follow up, it'll fall off the table. And that's 100% true. So when you talk about micromanagement, it's trusting, verifying. It's not necessarily micromanaging. You're just ensuring your staff are doing your work, and then follow up with that in the end to make sure it's done.
Right. And got a few more things. And then I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add. This may be a discussion that we could actually continue on another show. But one other thing I want to also touch on, when you become a supervisor, CYA, you can't do that. You're part of a team now. And we mentioned before is you credit for the successes gets passed off to the team. Responsibility for the failures you take up. Discipline is not an effort to CYA, but it should be rather an effort to educate. And sometimes I know it's hard. Me and Connie were talking about this the other day, where there's so much pressure that sometimes it's hard to really sit back and educate an employee, because what they may not realize is that the pressure is greater on the manager than the employee that made the mistake. But sometimes there's still good leaders that, with that pressure on them, knowing that the pressure is great, they still manage to look to educate, look to cultivate. And I think in the end, for those supervisors that think they're going to go in and just clean house and clean ship and, zero tolerance and all this stuff, you're looking at how you're looking the wrong way at discipline. Discipline is constructive by nature, which means that when you write a discipline, there's an investment of time given back to that employee to educate. If the employee is receptive to that, don't get me wrong. We're not talking about negligence or something criminal. We're talking about education. I want to give, like Andy said before, and I think we discovered in other videos, is when that person makes a mistake, I want to sit down and explain why that mistake could have hurt the facility or could have hurt the team or whatever the mistake is. But the point is there's an investment of time. Disciplinary is not, like a crock pot, set it and forget it. It's literally, I'm going to write something, but I really don't want to, but let's say I have to, but I want to do what I can to make sure it doesn't happen again. I want to sit with that employee, or if it is a good employee that made like a really bad mistake, what could we do as a leader to kind of balance that out? I mean, I can't protect them from the charge, but can I at least talk to my supervisor and let my supervisor know that this employee is a good employee? That this employee is not one of those other employees that is negligent all the time. How do I, make sure that the mistake is done in a manner that does show respect for the work that the person's done prior, and that goes either way. I make one mistake. Should I be treated the same way as someone that makes 20? So for a leader to kind of generalize the punishment out, you wind up disenfranchising the good employees who are not perfect. And then what happens here is you wind up cultivating an environment, or no, I'm going to say transforming an environment. Let's say that. Difference between transformation and cultivating. But I'm going to say you're going to wind up transforming the environment where you have good employees that start hiding their mistakes. Me and Connie touched on this before with accountability. In this position, as a supervisor, you want to do whatever you can to promote integrity. That's key. Am I providing an environment that allows this person to admit that they made a mistake? Now, yes, integrity really is doing the right thing. So again, if I make a mistake, I'm not making a mistake. I'm not going to admit it because, I'm afraid I'm going to get discovered, or, I'm afraid of the discipline. I'm admitting it because I made a mistake. It was wrong, and I'm willing to step up and deal whatever the consequences are. We need to have an environment that encourages that, where if someone does make a mistake, I'm quick to educate before putting stuff on paper, because at the end of the day, I'm putting stuff on paper just to protect myself, which means that if I'm looking to protect myself, what am I doing? I'm separating myself from the team. And I'm going to tell you something right now. If you do that at the very beginning, it is very hard, probably impossible, to earn that respect, especially when they know that this didn't have to be a write-up. This could have been something where you sat down with the person and, you know, I've seen it where let me give you another quick story real quick. I've seen it where this supervisor wrote up somebody, right, in which the higher level is like, even like, why'd you write this up? It winds up going to a hearing, and higher level management was like, there was no need to write this up. So what does that make the supervisor look like? You never even fought for me. You know, you never even stuck up for me, and I'm a good employee. And I came to you and told you I made a mistake. So you were so afraid that, you know, that now you have that responsibility of my actions that you threw me under the bus. And if you're afraid to take responsibility of other people's actions, then you will never be a good leader, and you need to get out now. Because in the end, what that does is you wind up cultivating this culture where people will not go to you, you will not be trusted, and in the end, when you're not trusted, mistakes are happening all around you, and you're not going to know. And that obviously adds to the safety and security of the environment that we work in. But Andy, what's your thoughts on supervisors that just are outright CYA? I mean, you as a jail admin, have you ever asked a supervisor that went quick to the pen and asked them, was this the best way to settle it, or could you have done it through another way?
Yeah, and I think that comes with just molding your supervisors, you know, just the mistakes that you've learned moving up through the ranks and kind of the guidance you're giving them to learn the job. But supervisors that are really quick to write somebody up, you know, and as an admin, you view that, you know, you have to dissect situations individually as they come. And if you realize, okay, well, he was quick to go to a reprimand instead of a first line disciplinary action, I need to kind of counsel this guy. It's definitely important to look out for those. But when you have a supervisor that is quick to throw people under the bus, you know, like you said, A, they need to get out now, but B, as an admin, you need to realize that that's what they're doing. And just in my opinion, good leaders need to take accountability for their mistakes, you know, and tell their staff, hey, you know, I screwed up. You know, I told on myself, I did this wrong, or I got, you know, brought up to the captain's office or whatever it might be on this particular issue. So it's okay to make mistakes. We just need to realize what they are and deal with them and then move forward. And I think that will prevent people from sweeping things under the carpet because they're afraid of retaliation or they're afraid of losing their job. When in fact, if they do that, they might be hurting themselves even more.
Yeah, and that's spot on, Andy. And Connie, I know you're listening here. So, I mean, that accountability and trust, I mean, are they in conflict with each other? I mean, can I be trusted if I'm going to be held accountable? Like what I mean by that is, if I'm a supervisor, can someone trust me knowing that I'm going to hold them accountable for their actions?
Yeah, I think people can still trust you. They have to know that you're going to be able to be objective, right? Like, so if you as a supervisor have that balance that you can look at the situation in its totality, because I'm just thinking about the example you raised, like it was never too late for that supervisor to come back and say, you know what, you're right. I didn't need to write this up, right? Like, I feel like it's okay to admit that you made a mistake before it goes too far. And, you know, I think that speaks to that supervisor's lack of confidence or strength or whatever it is, that he couldn't kind of walk it back and just admit to making a mistake. You know, it's a lapse in judgment. It happens all the time. But, you know, back to your question is like, quite honestly, when you have someone who, you know, they're not out to get you, I think it's easier for you to still trust that person and know that when they're holding you accountable, it's not coming from a place like I'm out to get you or I'm trying to make you the scapegoat for a situation. It is, here's what you did. Here is what the consequence might be for that thing. Or even sometimes it's just discussion. It's the discussion. Here are all the possible outcomes, right? And I don't think this is as egregious as whatever. So this is the direction that you're going to go. Not to say you're looking for that employee to agree or to give you the okay, but I think it's just the respect of the conversation happening.
I had a few more, but I know the dialogue's kind of going long. I mean, I had stuff, and just to throw it out there, getting involved in workplace gossip. You know, you as a supervisor, you're held to higher standards, so you're a professional. So definitely control the environment when you're there. If you feel things are starting to go unprofessional, play the role. You know, do what has to be done. When it comes to EED concerns, forward them up. You know, don't let anybody talk to you in confidence saying that, can I talk to you in confidence about, you know, such and such officer, they called me this today. There's no confidence here, guys. I want you to write a report and I'll submit it to the liaison. And then you will go ahead and also email the liaison and let the liaison know that these things are coming their way. Because as a supervisor, you're held to a higher standard. You're kind of in that position where you need to report. You know, it's funny when it comes to EED matters, they may not push it on the peers, but when you're a supervisor, you're put in a position where you have to report. It comes with the position. So you definitely don't want to have that dialogue of confidence where, oh, I'm not going to tell nobody. No, they will, or they could. So what you got to do is, if you want to have this dialogue real quick, here's what you're going to do. You're going to write it, sealed envelope, and I'm going to also do an email and send it to the liaison that this stuff is coming their way, just so I can protect myself. Because once you put me into that dialogue, I'm involved in that world now. So be careful of those EED complaints, but also be careful of what you allow around you to happen. You know, it may be funny when you're a peer, it's still not correct, but when you're a supervisor, what's going to happen is, if you have an environment that's very unprofessional, they look at you first. They're going to say, well, you allowed this to happen because you were in the room. And hey, I'll give you another example. Try going to a party or a function, and they find out that as an admin, you're there, and you could not even be in the same room where shit happens. But the admin was there. They were at the party. It's like, I had no idea what happened. I was outside, and this whole incident happened on the inside. It doesn't matter. You were there, and you're going to be the center of that attention. So when you become that supervisor, you're put into a higher level of expectation, definitely. And sometimes that expectation can conflict with who you want to be. But at that point, it's not up to what you want. It's who you need to be. And who you need to be is that supervisor. We're definitely going to probably have to have another discussion, because I would still like to explore those. I think those are worth exploring. We'll probably do a whole discussion on EEDs. But in all fairness, I want to ask Connie, do you have any other advice for someone kind of that first year as a front line, maybe a mistake you don't want them making?
So, I mean, for me, I think it's just always knowing that you're on, right? Like, you walk into a facility, no matter how you're dressed, right? Like, your title doesn't change. And so the expectation of professionalism is always there. And even when you step into a room and there are inappropriate conversations or comments or whatever, as you mentioned, I think those are times where you remove yourself so that you are not the witness, but you being a part of the audience is no longer okay. And, you know, that comes with the fact that your title has changed and there are greater expectations of you in your role, and inaction can definitely put you in a bad situation. So as you step into this new role, just understand that you are kind of always on stage. And when you say stuff, whether you think it's a joke or, you know, everyone laughed, it does not matter. It came from you who are in a management role. And if someone was offended, that puts you in the hot seat.
I love the stage thing, because guys, you're going to hold people to levels of professionalism. You yourself have to be that way. If your uniform's not where it needs to be, then you can't expect your subordinates to have their uniform where they need to be. If you aren't taking the concerns of the inmates seriously, then you can't expect your staff to take it seriously. You know, you have to lead by example. If you kind of we talked about gossip, but if you kind of get caught up in the middle as a gossiper, it kills morale. And if you happen to be that supervisor who, be advised, guys, supervisors have access to more areas. So supervisors, if you have a supervisor that's a person that gossips, you know, because they look to communicate to kill time, and they go to all these different areas, a supervisor could definitely kill the morale because they have bigger areas in which they can spread the gossip. Don't be that person. If anything, when there's gossip, do what you can to end it. That's what your job is. Do what you can to end it, because gossip kills morale. Hey, Andy, just before we go to a closing, do you have anything that you would like to give that maybe we missed?
Yep, two things real quick. As a new supervisor, you don't want to be unfair and inconsistent. You want to be fair and consistent, and that helps you down the road in leadership positions. You know, when you're fair and consistent with both the staff and inmate population, you know, your superior is going to come to, you know, subordinate staff or fellow supervisors and ask, you know, what do you think of Andy? Well, he's fair and consistent with everybody, and you're more than likely going to get that leadership role, as opposed to the guy who's the bum supervisor and picks favorites and whatever, submits to gossip, like you just said. So do not be unfair and inconsistent. You want to be fair and consistent. The other one I had was, when your supervisor comes to you with a task, do not tell your superior that you cannot do something. Now, if it's a new task and you're unsure of it, say, I'd be more than happy to do this. I know I can do it. You're going to have to give me some guidance because I've never done it before, but let's roll with it. The supervisor that says, I can't do this, tells me that you can't do your job. And you're put in that position out of trust from administration. And you need to understand that, again, admin from experience is going to find somebody else to put in that role that can do the job. So be confident, be sure of yourself, you can do that job. You know, you're a corrections officer, you can do anything you want to do.
Right. I like what you added there, Andy, because as a frontline supervisor, you're going to be asked to employ a lot of discretion. Not everything is defined by policy and procedure. So, you know, as a supervisor, we kind of expect you to be a navigator. You know, can you navigate your way through whatever these concerns are? Because if you're not a navigator, how do I trust you with my ship full of people? You know, in the end, where's this car going? You know, there's two metaphors there, because I used a boat and a car. So I actually impressed myself. But I'll continue with the same somber dialogue. I'm not going to make a big deal of that. I just thought that was very impressive. I don't even know if people are still watching at this point. We went past an hour, so I'm kind of rambling myself. But either way,
I'm so glad you're impressed by yourself.
Hey, hell, why not? And guys, so again, that was just the kind of final round. But anything you like to say in closing, Andy? I'd like to go to you first. Anything you want to say in closing?
You know, just be safe, guys. It's a crazy world we live in, you know, and we are the keepers of chaos, as Russ Hamilton says. So keep that up. Ask questions, network with fellow agencies, fellow facilities, because we all do the same job. And hopefully 2021 is going to be a hell of a lot better than 2020. So let's get that rolling, right?
I like how you were able to get that Keepers of Chaos in there. Very well done. You know, really, very. I mean, I'll tell you something.
It's an awesome page. I love it. So
I love it. And you know what I realized too, getting into this profession, I never let the cage become my cocoon. Oh, Connie, is that the name of your book? Anything in closing?
Listen, I just feel like you're going to step into this role. Many things may be unfamiliar. Don't hesitate to ask questions. Questions means you're critically thinking about the expectations of you. You're critically thinking about the task ahead. And really, it's helping you to figure out how to navigate. So you never have to say, I can't do the job, right? You figure out how to get things done. Who are the right people? Where are the right places to go? Who's the right person to call? And that way you can be on point in your role.
I love it. You know, guys, as a supervisor, I think it's one of the laws of leadership is you set the lid. You know, at the end, you decide how far your people can go. So you got to do what you can to elevate them. And obviously you can't do that if you yourself don't elevate. You know, that's the key. Even as a supervisor, you're still learning. So be open to advice. And another thing I want to add is be open to the advice of the people that are your subordinates too. You know, they may know more about the job than you do. All because you're a supervisor, you know, it doesn't mean you know everything. So always have your ears open. I think we touched on that a little bit in the beginning. Listen, empower, let the team be involved in the solutions. And again, just as a reminder, pass the credit for the good, take responsibility for the bad. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit the bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.